Morning. Thank you so much for being here. As Mike said, we've got so many clients here. It's so nice to see so many familiar faces and some new clients. And I happen to know we have some not yet clients in here. So I'm delighted to have you all in here as well. And hopefully we're going to sway you. So this is so much fun to talk about the high potentials. I feel like so often we're called in to talk about problem situations. Problem employees, employees that are having issues, concerns, trying to motivate. There's some crazy statistic like 80% of our time on 20% of our people, and typically that's not the 20% that's like growing the business, right? So this is awesome. Speaking of statistics, and I love them only because I think they're funny and sometimes they're so unreal. The one I read this morning on high performers is high performers, and I'm going to use high performers and high potentials interchangeably this morning, but high performers can deliver 400% more than your average performer. That's not your great performer, but 400%, so that's pretty amazing. But we've got all this amazing talent. How do we harness it, and how do we keep them motivated, and how do we drive them to success? And sometimes it's difficult. If you've had a high performer that often is coming to you with a great new idea, and you're like, oh my gosh, here they come with another great idea, why can't we just do what we're doing? But it does get a little bit difficult, but it's super important because if they aren't charged, they're going to leave, right? And so that's what we want to talk about. I've had the pleasure, good morning 451, I'm glad to see you guys. Thank you for joining us. So this morning we want to talk about what employees want. We know this. So, and Liz is going to cover comp. We know they also want some money. But they want to be respected. They want to be valued, right? We're not making widgets. Some of you are making widgets. But those people making widgets still want to be respected and valued. They want to be heard. They want to be part of a team. And they want to be known as an individual, right? And sometimes we overlook that in our business, right? Because we're so worried about the business at hand and not as much about this part. The thing about high potentials, not only do they want to be respected, they also want to be able to influence. They want to be asked for their opinion, and they want to be able to lead either cross-functional employees, even if they don't have direct reports. So they really want to be integral into the business. So Barrett Distribution has been a client of ours for a long time, and they're not in the room today. Because they were tied up doing other things, not because they didn't want to hear about their own program. But I've had the pleasure of working with them for actually about 7 years now. And Arthur Barrett, some of you who have been to prior seminars may have met. He was on a panel of ours at one time, and Mary Conley's their HR manager. So about 3 years ago, we had the year of performance, and we talked a lot at Barrett about building high-performing teams. And then it occurred to us that that's great. So now we've ideally managed performance a little bit better, but what do we do with the real high top performers, and how do we keep them motivated, engaged? So all this program is turning your great employees into your future leaders, right? No one's going to be at a role forever, at a job forever, at a position forever. So how do we continue to build the pipeline so that we can continue to prosper and flourish? So a high potential program, the one we did at Barrett, has had a few different iterations. And the second year, we learned so many things from the first year, which was good. The first year, we would, on all tokens, consider it a success. But typically, it's about an annual program. And what we found, the first year, we did a full year, calendar year. And what happens is, you don't want to stop a program and start the new program the next day. You kind of need a little time to regroup and say what worked well, what didn't work well. And so we found that like an 8-month period is kind of ideal. So we kick it off in January. It starts February 1, and it kind of rolls up September 30. And then people have the last quarter of the year to kind of focus on business needs and goals, and it allows us to regroup and get ready for the next year. So Barrett has between 300 and 400 people. So their program is 10 people. You don't want it too much smaller than, I'd say 6 is probably the minimum, because as we'll talk about, people wind up dropping out for various reasons throughout the year. So I'd say 8 to 12 is probably an ideal size. We had mentors in this program, which I'll talk more about. And then there's usually some sort of ancillary. So the whole point of the program is the thank you. It's thank you for being a great employee and a future leader here. But we also need something kind of on the side to keep us motivated and to keep us on track. So we'll talk about a book club or some other developmental opportunity and how to kind of build that way. So selection, we know, and it's interesting, is I think to the clients that I work with, I know off the top of my head who the high potentials are, just because, right, you know who they are. But how do we actually go about selecting them? So, and there are a few different ways. Performance conversations is one of the easiest ways to do it. You can assess their interests in expanding their role or doing other things in those conversations. We nominate them, and I'll talk more about this process, and then assigning a mentor. The 9 block is how we've traditionally done this at Barrett. So those of you familiar, up here we have the high potential, high performance kind of category or block. And just, I'd love a show of hands for who all uses this in their businesses. Great, thank you. It's a great tool. It's also not one and done, right? So in many organizations that I support, we look at this on a quarterly basis because people do move around. You can be a high performer, high potential, and then things happen, right? We all have lives going on outside. We've got different things that affect our performance and also our ability to commit fully. So we plot people on the grid, managers do, and then we kind of think about who would be the right people. So anybody in this block is sort of eligible for the program. Again, we're assessing in our performance conversations any interest in sort of developing in that regard. And it doesn't exclude, so you could be here and still be in the program, or here and still in the program. Maybe here, but you'd want to be kind of up in this corner. But otherwise we're kind of looking at those are being the C performers and probably folks that we're not wanting to spend as much time developing, right? And we may be, in fact, encouraging them to seek excellence elsewhere if they're not long-term for us. So the performance conversations, we've talked a lot about performance conversations, and what we're also finding is both millennials and also high performers, once a year is not good enough. They want to hear feedback. They want feedback very, very regularly. They want to know how they're doing, and they don't want to know that they're doing a great job and keep it up, right? They want to know what else can I do? Where could I grow? Where could I expand? How could I help the business? I want to have an integral role in this. And so by telling them that they're just doing a good job and we'll see you again next year, that's going to be incredibly demotivating to them. So many of you are probably in your organizations having one-on-ones. These are just becoming so much more frequent and important to this kind of a conversation. 360 feedback, getting feedback from people that work below and above and also peers is super important, because how they show up, the high potentials, high performers, how they show up to you may or may not be the same as how they show up to their peers or people below them as well. So we'll talk about assigning the mentor. This is one of the most interesting parts. So we have all these grids, all these 9-block grids from all different managers around the organization. So then at Barrett, we had a list of about 20 people. And then we said, well, 20 people is a little unwieldy, so how are we going to cull that down? So we wound up, all the general managers around the country, they have locations nationwide, prepared a list and came up with nominations, and they had to support why they would recommend this person for the high potential program. And how cool, first of all, if you take a step back and say 20 amazing future leaders in the organization. So that's like something that we definitely would like to harness and make sure that we're getting the appropriate people in here. So then once we get them in here, what are we going to do with our high potential population? We're going to assign mentors. And interestingly, this was almost a little bit harder than getting the high potential employees. So typically, a mentor should be high potential themselves, right? We want forward thinking, we want growth, futuristic kind of thought, multitaskers, because this is in addition to their day job. They have to be organized because there are lots of dates and schedules that they need to follow. Good internal organizational aptitude. If I had to say one thing, I think that would be the one most important thing actually. This person is in charge of the high potential and shepherding them through the organization and exposing them to negotiation skills and how to navigate bureaucracy, internal bureaucracy, different levels, having to get buy-in. And then also don't need to be content experts. in the first year of the program, we had an employee and they had a particularly specific IT goal that they were going to develop in the high potential program. We assigned a mentor who was super at internal aptitude and getting around the organization. And he kept getting hung up because he's like, I don't know IT. And it didn't matter that he didn't know IT. We just needed to make sure that he could shepherd his high potential to the appropriate person. And when the appropriate person didn't get back to them right away, which is going to happen, because again, this is above and beyond the day job, then how do you negotiate that? And how do you follow up without being too annoying by getting your point across, etc. So this has been one of the hardest parts, interestingly, is matching these people up, excuse me, because there's a lot that goes into it, right? We've got schedules, we've got personalities, and we've got different interests. So this part was sort of interesting. By telling people that there are future leaders in the organization, putting them in a group, assigning them a mentor, and saying, good luck in the high potential program. So this is why we needed some sort of a goal or a book club or something to give the group and the time limit some structure. So at Barrett, each high potential comes up with a goal, and it could be anything that they're interested in doing, and we had some amazing success stories in terms of what they were interested in pursuing and then what they accomplished at the end. And a book club this year at Barrett, we used 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which we've also used at Insight. And what it allowed us to do was to give some ancillary tips on how to be high functioning and how to be more effective and how to increase your time management and all of those things. So it really wound up being useful. The mentors and the high potentials need to check in on a regular basis. So we tried to schedule that on a bi-weekly basis. Nationwide, it's really a little bit more complicated. It's so much easier if everybody's on one campus. But we were able to navigate the different time zones, and then we'd have an entire group call every 3 weeks, which is sort of an interesting time frame, but that's, we found out the cadence that worked for the group. It wasn't too frequent, but it wasn't infrequent, so that people forgot what they were doing. So some of the pitfalls are of the program. So the first year we had 10 people in the program, and we had 2 people voluntarily terminate for various reasons. It actually wasn't related to their dislike of the organization, thank goodness. So that's going to happen. This year, interestingly, we had 1 person opt out about halfway through because they felt as though the day job, if you will, was just they couldn't do both and they couldn't dedicate themselves fully to both. So we had multiple conversations about it, but then eventually, yes, she was excused from the program, and in all likelihood she'll come back to us at a future time. But what happens is, 1, we need to make sure that we're communicating it within the organization, that this is a special group. This is, again, future leaders, and by picking a small group, you're not really excluding other people, because everybody has the eligibility at Barrett, for example, to get into the program at a future date. So the way we communicate it is, this is this year's class, and everyone's eligible in future years, and we encourage you, if you're interested, to speak with your manager and to ideally have more information on that if you'd like to participate at a future time. One thing that the high potentials felt, though, was by having this goal and this book club and this another relationship that they needed to manage and massage, they felt as though they had a lot of extra work, and they weren't really sure how that played into, you said I'm a future leader, now I can't really get all my stuff done. I feel like it's almost like a little bit of a burden. People were super sensitive to expressing it that way, but you could tell that that's the way it felt. So I would just be cognizant that that is probably going to come up, and the way we have presented it, and it seems to have worked, is that this, if you've read Stephen Covey, it's almost like this is a big rock. If your career in your path here at Barrett is important to you, then the high potential program would be something that you would want to make time for. And if not, we could have subsequent conversations and decide if it's not right for you, then it's actually fine. But they needed to make time for it. So it wasn't an add-on, nice to have. It was really, this is kind of going to drive your career here. It was helpful to frame it to them in that way. And obviously, everybody's got other things to do, the mentors had other things to do. So fitting it in was difficult. I just want to make you aware of that. Also, changes in job, changes in priority, different projects, those all come into play as well, right? We're all busy. There are terminations from time to time, but the biggest issue was the time. I don't have time to be on the every 3-week calls. I don't have time to meet with my mentor. So then it becomes a decision, is this important to you or isn't it? So at the end of the program, we have the high potentials present to the leadership team. So that's great for a whole bunch of different reasons. One, it helps them decide and determine what they've actually gotten out of the program, hopefully something of value. But it also allows the leadership team to assess their growth and their potential, because ideally in this role, as they continue to move up the organization, they're going to be doing more and more of this. What is interesting also is it can be all levels. The high potential program can be all levels of the organization. So we've picked people right off the warehouse floor that you can just tell have a spark and that there's something that's going to be amazing in them. And we've all had it all the way up to managerial levels. So at Barrett, there's also a thank you. In their case, they do a gift card, just an acknowledgement, frankly, of the time and effort that they put into the program. And how to, then the conversations around how to keep the career moving. So the first year, 2 of the high potential candidates completed the program, really flying colors, and have become mentors the second year, which is kind of the way you would like to see the progression go. And then interest in the next year and next year's program. So if you did want to do a program, you kind of want to think about it on a multi-year, or as my favorite way to present anything like this is as a pilot program, right? So we kick the tires and we decide if it's going to fly or not, but then to see how it's going to roll out year on year. And so I'm not saying throw effort into it if it doesn't look like it's sustainable, but by the same token, having the longevity of a program like that makes the participants feel that much more invested in the organization, right? It's like a part of being something special. The communication of it is difficult. Communication's difficult in every organization. So we, tout it at every opportunity we can. It's in newsletters, it's on whiteboards, it's on the TV screen that blinks, and just a way to give these folks additional level of importance, frankly, again, for future leaders. So I'm curious, if you think that you need, I would be so happy to talk to you a little bit more about the Barrett program and about how they did it. What we found, though, is the participants are just so appreciative at the end, after they've gone through all the work, of the time that the company has invested in them to focus on their development. It's different than sending someone to a class, right? An external opportunity. It's different than telling them they're doing a good job. It's different from giving them additional money. It makes them feel invested in the organization. And as we know, the number one way that employees feel engaged is to understand how what they do rolls up to what the organization does. So this is a way to directly make that tie and to make them feel special. So if you haven't considered it before, I hope you might consider it. I'd be delighted to talk to anybody about how it worked at Barrett and how you could envision it rolling out. It's a time commitment. It is not an expense really to the organization. You don't have to do a reward at the end. There is a time commitment, so I guess if you equate that. But again, if you're developing your future leaders and this is another opportunity to tell the high performers that they're important, would like you to stay here so that they don't go elsewhere. So I'll leave on that note. So thank you for the time this morning.